The 2024 transfer portal was loaded with some big-time names, and there were many guys who were expected to have a huge impact at their next school. In today's video, we're going to continue a series we've been doing on the channel for a while now, and I'm going to talk about how the top 10 receivers in the 2024 portal actually ended up doing during the 2024 season. We're going to go through who they are, where they came from, and how their season went. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the 2024 wide receiver class. We had a couple notable guys who are not in the top 10, and that included guys like Julian Fleming, Keandre Lambert-Smith, and Will Shepard. The first guy though at number 10 is going to be Sam Brown. He is a 4-star transfer as he came out of New Hampstead High School in the state of Georgia. Coming out of high school, Sam was a huge deal as he was listed as a 4-star player and would ultimately decide to go to West Virginia at first. Sam would spend 2 years in a Mountaineer uniform and would catch a total of 10 passes without a touchdown. He eventually went over to Houston, where in 2022 he broke out with 41 catches, and then in 2023 had his real breakout season with 62 receptions for 815 yards and 3 scores. He's the second Houston player on this list, and after the season was over, he became the number 10 transfer and decided to go over to Miami. Cam Ward was the new quarterback, and they already had Xavier Restrepo as their wide receiver 1, but Sam Brown would hope to be the number 2 option for them. His 2024 season ended up being pretty solid as he caught 36 passes for 509 yards and 2 touchdowns. Honestly, I'm not quite sure what I would expect out of the number 10 overall transfer, but I would say he underperformed a little bit. Also, given how good Miami's offense was, he probably could have put up better numbers, but to be fair, they did have Restrepo. I'm going to say he did a solid job. He could have been better and also could have been worse. At number 9, we have another Houston transfer, and that is Matthew Golden. Coming out of Klein Cain High School, Golden put up incredible numbers, as in his 3 seasons as a varsity starter, he ended up going for 3,200 yards and 32 touchdowns and became a 4-star recruit. He decided to sign with Houston coming out of high school, and he was one of the top players to ever sign with the Cougars in program history. Golden ended up having 2 solid seasons there, as he was ultimately stuck behind Tank Dell his first season, but he still managed to catch 38 passes for 584 yards and 7 touchdowns. In 2023, Golden was a little bit limited, but he still caught 38 passes for 404 yards and 6 scores. He had one of the better 2-year stretch for any Houston receiver in recent memory, and would decide to enter the 2024 portal. With Texas losing a couple of their big weapons to the draft, including Xavier Worthy, Matthew Golden was brought in to hopefully fill that void and have a big season. This past year with the Longhorns, Golden became the second option on the team, catching 58 passes for 987 yards and 9 total touchdowns. Golden had a spectacular season and has probably played himself into being a day 2 NFL draft pick. Maybe he'll slip to day 3, but he definitely was not a bust coming out of the portal and had a really good season, and ultimately I thought he was super underrated regardless. At number 8, we had Dion Burks, a transfer from Purdue to Oklahoma. Coming out of high school, Dion Burks was a pretty big name, as he was listed as a 3-star recruit in the state of Michigan. He ended up having a breakout junior season in which he caught 35 passes for 819 yards and 12 touchdowns, and because of that, he was listed as a top 100 receiver in the class of 2022. Burks decided to follow in line of a couple other big names at Purdue and decided to commit to the Boilers. The number 809th ranked player in the class of 2021 ended up having a slow start to his time in West Lafayette, but in 2023 he would break out. He became the top weapon for Hudson Card, catching 47 passes for 629 yards and 7 total touchdowns. He averaged 13.4 yards per carry, and due to his big playability and potential, he would transfer to Oklahoma, who really needed another big-time receiver. Sadly though, Burks would deal with injury in 2024 and ended up missing 7 total games. Burks still caught 31 passes though, and also had 245 yards and 3 touchdowns. He showed his immense potential, and instead of being a late-round draft pick, he has decided to come back for the 2025 season and will likely be the number 1 wide receiver for new quarterback John Mateer. Burks should be a big-time 2026 draft prospect name, and I'm going to put an asterisk on him because he was hurt so much, but he was still a solid addition for the 24 season, despite those injury issues. At number 7, we have CJ Daniels. I feel like I've talked about him probably 30 times on the channel now, but going back in time, he ended up having 1,500 yards with 15 touchdowns as a senior, but was still just listed as a 2-star recruit and the number 408 receiver in his class. He went to Parkview High School in Georgia, but would go across the country over to Virginia, where he would play for Liberty for a couple of years. He ended up having a really good 2021 season with Malik Willis, catching 37 passes for 629 yards and 7 touchdowns, but after being limited in 2022, he really broke out in 2023. Daniels caught 55 passes for 1,067 yards and 10 total touchdowns. He then decided to transfer to LSU, who lost both Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, and he tried to become one of their top options, and he ended up having 42 catches for 480 yards, but did not have a touchdown. He was definitely seen as a disappointment, and LSU fans let me know down below why he didn't have a good year, but with one more year of eligibility, Daniels decided to enter the transfer portal again, and he will now go over to Miami to be a pass catcher for Carson Beck. I'd say for being the number 7 overall transfer with that pedigree at Liberty, he was disappointing in his one season at Baton Rouge, but I'm not really sure why. One of the more interesting names in the 2024 transfer portal was Noah Rogers. Coming out of Rollsville High School in North Carolina, Rogers ended up being a top 8 receiver and the number 40 overall recruit. This came after he had a tremendous 2 years there, having over 3,200 receiving yards and 37 touchdown passes in his final 2 years there. He would decide to commit to Ohio State and try to be one of the next big names in the Brian Hartline pipeline. Unfortunately, Rogers was not able to see the field, as there's just so much talent at Ohio State, so he would enter the transfer portal after just one season and would go over to NC State. Led by quarterback Grayson McCall, he ended up becoming the second option on the team, finishing with 35 receptions for 478 yards and 1 total touchdown. Rogers ended up having a semi-decent year, given the struggles of NC State's offense, but he also could have been a little bit better. I think he should have been ranked a little bit lower in the 2024 wide receiver rankings, but in all honesty, he didn't have a bad year either. All roads lead to this year's. The wild ride to New Orleans is almost over, and the big game is just around the corner. For fans looking to cash in on this year's, MyBookie is where it's at. They've packed in promotions, props, and features that make betting on this event not only exciting, but also profitable. So here's the playbook for this year. There's a couple of props that you can bet on, which include how long it'll last, if the singer will nail every word or have a ton of slip-ups, and heck, even the color of this year's Gatorade. Yeah, MyBookie has tons of options, and if you bet, it'll make it more fun. There are a couple of options including boosted parlays, the money bag, squares, tiered bonuses, and live betting and streaming. When you decided what you're going to pick, go over to MyBookie and use my promo code Fisher50 for your first bet. Celebrate your Sunday by having a good time with MyBookie and get your game plan ready. If you're one of those people that thinks the NFL is rigged for the Chiefs, you can now use MyBookie to put your money where your mouth is. If there's one thing for certain, we have no idea what's going to happen during the big game this year, but be sure to head over to MyBookie to make this Sunday a little bit more entertaining. Thank you to them for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so at number 5, we have Colby Young. Colby Young has a very interesting story, as going back in time coming out of Pennsylvania, he was listed as a 3-star recruit, but ended up having to go to Lackawanna College. During that 2021 season, he caught 24 passes for 472 yards and 9 touchdowns. Because of that, he became the number 7 overall JUCO wide receiver and a top 100 JUCO player overall, and would actually commit to the Miami Hurricanes. Young would then spend his next 2 years down there, catching 32 passes in 2022 and 47 catches in 2023. Each season, he also caught 5 touchdowns and had about 900 yards receiving. Because of that, he ended up going to Georgia, where this past year, he was supposed to have a big impact, but instead was disappointing. He caught 11 passes for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also got into some legal trouble. I'm not going to go into that situation, but it looks like things are somewhat getting resolved, and he could return to the field in 2026. But either way, I hope that mess is cleaned up, and on paper, it was a disappointing addition for Georgia. And number 4, we had a huge name in Antoine Wells Jr. Coming out of Highland Springs High School in the state of Virginia, Antoine Wells really didn't have much recruiting attention coming out of high school, as he ended up having 36 catches for 880 yards and 12 touchdowns as a senior, but would ultimately have to go to James Madison for his first couple years of college football. Under Coach Sig, he'd end up breaking out in 2021 with 83 receptions for 1,250 yards and 15 touchdowns. He was one of the best pass catchers in the FCS and would decide to transfer to South Carolina for 2022. He became Spencer Rattler's main target, finishing with 68 receptions for 928 yards and 6 touchdowns. He could have gone off to the NFL, but instead decided to return in 2023, where he ended up having 3 catches. This was due to some sort of injury, but South Carolina fans will tell you that he opted out and that there was something else going on behind the scenes. He ended up not making a ton of good friends in South Carolina when it was all said and done, and decided to go to Ole Miss for the 2024 season. I think he was expecting to have a much bigger year than he had, but he ended up being the third option, finishing with 28 catches for 553 yards and 6 touchdowns. It wasn't a bad year, but it wasn't an excellent season either. Antoine Wells' stock was super high in 2022, and it has sort of fallen off a bit. He'll likely be a day 3 draft pick and could maybe sneak up into day 2, but he definitely had a confusing and interesting legacy in college football. He'll be sure to get a video here in a couple of weeks during draft season. At number 3, we have our second Georgia Bulldog in London Humphreys. Coming out of Nashville, Tennessee, Humphreys went totally under the radar, as his stats really weren't all that great, as he only had about 1,000 yards during his final 2 high school seasons, but he was a star in other areas. He ended up setting a regional record of 21.73 in the 200-meter dash, which actually broke Jalen Ramsey's record. He would arrive at Vanderbilt in 2023, and Humphreys ended up having a decent season. He caught 22 passes for 439 yards and 4 touchdowns, and due to him performing well as a freshman at Vanderbilt, and that combined with his speed and potential, he transferred to Georgia. Again, he was supposed to fill in and hopefully be one of the top targets for the Dogs, but this year he was semi-disappointing. He only caught 15 passes for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns, but as a whole, Georgia's wide receiver core was extremely disappointing. I'm not quite sure what is going on with them. Georgia cannot seem to figure out the wide receiver spot in the transfer portal, and they might be better off going for a bunch of guys like Lad McConkey again. Who knows, but London Humphreys was disappointing based on being the number 3 overall receiver in the portal. One of the more interesting names in the 2024 portal was Evan Stewart. Coming out of Liberty High School, Evan Stewart was one of the top names in his class, as he ended up finishing his high school career with 111 catches for 2,100 yards and 21 total touchdowns. Because of that, Stewart was seen as the number 1 overall wide receiver in his recruiting class, and even beat out Luther Burden for that top spot. Stewart would arrive at Texas A&M in 2022 and made an impact right away for them. He ended up becoming the Aggies' top option as a pass catcher, as he would finish the 2022 campaign with 53 catches for 649 yards and 2 touchdowns, and would then fall off a bit in 2023 with 38 catches for 500 yards and 4 scores. But due to his immense potential and his obvious NFL talent, he decided to transfer to Oregon for the 2024 season to be in a better system that could better utilize him. After a slow start, Stewart ended up finishing with 48 catches for 613 yards and 5 touchdowns. Obviously, Stewart is good, and he was stuck behind Tez Johnson this year, but in my opinion, he's been underwhelming for being the number 1 overall wide receiver in his class, and I would say he hit the minimum bar of hype for being the number 2 overall transfer receiver. And finally, at number 1, we have Isaiah Bond. Coming out of Buford High School in Georgia, Bond was the number 2 athlete in his class and the 43rd overall player. This came after a pretty solid high school career, in which he ended up being one of the best athletes in the country. Bond would arrive at Alabama under Nick Saban, and actually became one of the better receivers for the Tide during his time in Tuscaloosa. In 2022, he caught 17 passes, and in 2023, he broke out with 48 catches for 668 yards and 4 touchdowns. This also included that incredible game-winning score against Auburn, which got them to the playoff, and then Bond would decide to enter the portal. Hoping to become one of the replacements as wide receiver 1 for Texas, he decided to transfer over to Austin, where this year Bond ended up catching 34 passes for 540 yards and 5 touchdowns. If you just look at stats, it looked like he had a somewhat underwhelming season, but after watching the games, Isaiah Bond definitely looked better in person, had a couple of injury issues, and also the receiver room was very deep there. I'm not trying to give him a million passes, but he's still projected as a second-round pick, so obviously he is seen as a good enough player, and he helped them get pretty far in the playoff, so I would say it was just an average or solid season for Bond, but he was probably a little bit underwhelming for being the number 1 overall option. So yeah, looking back at these top 10 guys, not a lot of them really hit. Matthew Golden probably was the most impressive of all of them, and the rest of them were either pretty bad or somewhat underwhelming. A couple of them still have time to turn things around, but for now, that's how the 2024 top 10 receivers from the portal ended up doing. What do you guys think? Why did some of these guys struggle? What year or class should I do next? And what other topics should I do on the channel? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.